record on this computer. Okay. Do you? All right. Why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself? So, I mean,
Sure.
I'm going to be quiet now.
Okay. So my name is Devin Strong, and I have known James for, gosh, probably going on 10 years now. James is a friend of my son's. They both went to Oglethorpe University in Buckhead. And I met James pretty early on in Oliver's college career. And he is silly enough to think that I know something about this disability stuff just because I've lived with it longer than he has. So I was born with cerebral palsy. I'm sure you all know what that is. I walked on crutches until I was 38. And then I ended up with a spinal cord compression up at C5 and 6. Don't really know what caused that. I was in a pretty serious car accident a few years before where I was rear-ended by a guy doing about 50 miles an hour when I was literally stopped in the left-hand turn lane. So I've always wondered if that was the cause of it. But I also walked for almost 40 years, slightly bent over on crutches. So anyway, at age 38, I had the spinal cord compression, had a fusion, which stopped the deterioration, but it basically took another 20 to 25% of my mobility. So I've been in a manual wheelchair ever since. So that's been 22 years. By profession, I am a Lutheran pastor. For those who don't know exactly what a Lutheran is, there aren't very many of us in the South. Lutherans broke away from Roman Catholics about 500 years ago, and sort of our closest theological partner in terms of denominations would be the Episcopalians. So we have most in common probably with the Episcopalians. Some still with the Roman Catholics, and also Methodists and Presbyterians on the other side. We are a progressive denomination, so we have been ordaining women for just over 50 years, and our particular denomination has been ordaining gay and lesbian people for about 15 years. I serve a small parish just south of Savannah on the Georgia coast. And James sent me how many questions here? 10 questions, which if I answered them all, we would be here until roughly breakfast time tomorrow. And that's probably more time than you want to spend. I'm happy to answer any one of those questions or more than one, but basically I want to answer your questions. I want to hear your stories and just make this an open dialogue. So I'm here to talk about ministry with a disability, my life with a disability. I didn't say I've been married for coming up 37 years in December, and I have 2 children, and an Oliver that James knows, and a daughter who is also a twin to Oliver, and they are almost 28. So that's me family wise. But like I said, I'm happy to answer ministry questions, disability questions, but I want to hear what we have in common, how we differ, how we handle things. So I want to hear what's helpful to you.
This wasn't one of the ones that I gave you, but I'm gonna ask it because why not? You grew up with cerebral palsy. You had it your whole life. How did you decide?
Right, I was born with it.
Yeah.
Right, I was born in 1965, and I was about 8 weeks premature. Mom was a smoker, so that added to it. My being premature added to it, and then also a medical mistake. The doctors gave my mom an epidural, but where they injected it, they just about stopped her heart rather than numbing her from the waist down. So yeah, I was born with cerebral palsy. I would describe my CP as moderate. I, I, I have gross motor coordination in my hands. Even before the spinal cord compression, my mobility was pretty significantly limited. I walked on the Canadian style crutches. But yeah, I was born with cerebral palsy.
How did you decide to then be a pastor? You could have done anything.
Well, I just grew up in a very religious home, uh, not rigid religious home. Sometimes people hear religious and they think, really strict. That wasn't necessarily my home growing up, but we were very active in a large Lutheran church in suburban Detroit, and so uh, my friends, my faith life just sort of all grew up around the church, and I was blessed to have a lot of different mentors along the way. A lot of people who go into ministry will trace their call to either camping ministry, like outdoor ministry, or campus ministry, getting active in their faith in college. And I happen to have both of those experiences. I grew up going to one of our Lutheran church camps in Michigan and had a phenomenal experience with it. It's like my faith came alive when we sort of got outside the realm of the routine of Sunday morning worship. I realized that faith could be real and lived. And then I had a fabulous campus pastor who knew how to laugh and took his job seriously, but he knew how to be a real human being. I didn't have that with my pastor growing up. He was a very serious Swede, but my campus pastor was a real human being, and like I said, knew how to laugh, knew how to relate to people. And so finally, I had this image of somebody who could live their faith and still connect with the real world. So I would say my call to ministry was very gradual, starting in the church, various youth directors and other people who mentored me along the way, but significantly influenced by my experiences at Lutheran Church Camp and then in campus ministry in college.
Okay.
But related to the disability, that part of it, you know, I knew early on that I wasn't going to be able to have a job using my hands, right? My parents, drilled it into me. I mean, I probably knew in second grade that I was going to go at least to college, if not beyond, because with a disability like ours, the only way you're going to make a living is with your hands, or I'm sorry, with your mind or your mouth. And so, um, uh, um, it wasn't necessarily meant I was um, going to be a pastor at that point, but I knew I had to have a job where I could use my brain and my mouth, and ministry fit the bill.
I would say a lot of us here, we have a lot of big mouths on this call. So
Yep,
that's
exactly.
definitely relatable.
It's an occupational hazard.
Um, I didn't even think about this, but it just occurred to me. When you were growing up, it was, 1960s. So there wasn't the ADA, there wasn't anything like that.
That's right, way before that.
So how did you make it all work? I mean, that had to be quite a challenge.
Well, it certainly was, but I have to credit my parents for that. And the older I get, the more I realize. I mean, they were 25 and 26 years old when I was born, so they were just kids, younger than probably most of us, all of us on this call when I was born. And they weren't experts in disability. They just had a kid who happened to have cerebral palsy, but they were huge fighters for me. Um, uh, like most kids with my disability, all the doctors recommended that I be institutionalized and basically be put away. I would never walk, I would never go to school, I would never, do anything. So just keep me comfortable and put me away somewhere. And the doctors weren't being mean. That was just the prevailing wisdom of the day, right? But yeah, just based on their own instinct, as parents, they fought against that, and so they insisted that I go to the local elementary school and and then junior high and high school and on, but everything was a battle for accessibility. I mean, the the local elementary school, which was just a couple blocks from where I grew up, had a couple of steps uh, just to get into the building. Nothing major, I think 2 or 3 steps. And of course, I was on crutches at that time, and the principal or the staff said, "Well, he can't come here if he can't get in the building." And this was before they were willing to build ramps or anything. So I remember I was getting therapy at 5 days a week back then, and so they worked with me on being able to manage 3 stairs with my crutches, and then the junior high I went to was 2 stories, and I had one of my surgeries, I think when I was in 7th grade, and I remember the principal himself hauling my butt up and down, the 2 floors for the various classes. When I went to high school, we were in a larger district. We had moved at that point, and the high school that I normally would have gone to was an older building, several more half levels. I think it was only a 2 or 3 story building, but it was one of those buildings with a half a level here, quarter level there, tons of steps. It would have been really hard for me. And so I ended up getting bused to the other side of town to a newer high school that was all on one floor. But it was, a lot of it was just, on the part of my parents, a lot of fighting, and on my part, I didn't know any different, right? I'm sure you've had people ask, well, how do you manage? How do you get along? And it's like, well, this is the body I was born in, and this is the world as it exists. And so if I wanted to participate in anything, I had to figure out how to manage it. And probably like a lot of you, the best way to get me to do something was to tell me I couldn't do it. Sure, I can't, just watch me. And I had parents who supported that determination, and I was fortunate to have a lot of friends along the way, some good teachers, some not so good teachers. But none of us makes it into this world alone. I had a lot of good mentors and a lot of good support.
Does anyone else have a question for Pastor Strong?
Yeah, I do. Hey, Pastor, my name's Tom. I'm a late entry, and I'm probably going to leave early, but I wanted to say hello, and I want to thank you. I'm on the board of Champions Community Foundation. I want to thank you for joining this illustrious group.
You're most welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Now, is that M on the background? Is that Michigan?
It absolutely is. Yes.
Okay.
We all have our enthusiasm. I grew up, like I said, in suburban Detroit, so I've been watching Michigan play football for 40 years.
So it's not just because you won the not just because you won the national championship last year.
Well, that helps, but I've been a Michigan fan through a lot of lean years too.
Okay. Well, I happen to be I'm across the state right now in Saugatuck, Holland area, Michigan.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Well, one of the congregations I served was a little farther up in Michigan, and a lot of those folks were Michigan State fans. So I root for Michigan State too, as long as they're not playing Michigan.
Okay. All right. Well, we're really happy you're here. Thank you very much, and I just wanted to say hello.
Very, very good.
Paul, I thought I saw your hand up. Did you have something to say to Pastor Strong? No? Okay. All right. Pastor, do you have your questions pulled up, or do I need to?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Like I said, if you really don't want me to go through this this whole list, we'll be here till breakfast. But I thought there were a couple of interesting ones here. the first question that James asks is about resilience. Can you share a specific instance where your resilience was tested and how you overcame the challenge? Um, and like, is there one instance where where any of us have experienced resistance? Probably only one in the last hour, right? But one thing I will say more generally, we think of the church, or maybe you don't, but a lot of people think of the church as a place of all nice people, and boy, they're going to be welcoming and accepting of differences. And I've experienced that in many ways. I've served a lot of several churches, 7 or 8 churches over my 33-year career, and I've met lots of great people. But what I've also found is that Christians can be Christian nice, right? In the Lutheran Church, you're not assigned where you serve by a bishop like you are in the Catholic Church or the Methodist Church. You basically interview it at a church like you would for any other job. And I went through many interviews, many years where I had a very hard time getting a call because I would be sitting across the table from folks, and most people, as you all well know, don't know somebody in their working years who is in a wheelchair, right? Wheelchairs are for old people. And that's what grandmas and grandpas have. And so I had a lot of congregations who um, uh, would not call me as their pastor, and that's one thing, but they wouldn't even um, admit it. They wouldn't talk about their concerns about the disability. So I had to learn, when I'm interviewing with people, it's my job to get them to talk about it. Yeah, I try to help them laugh about it. I try to help them ask questions. I try to give them practical examples of how I would do this or that or the other thing, as opposed to an able-bodied pastor. But I certainly have experienced my share of discrimination as a person with a disability. It really started in 2009. I served what we call a mission church, a little church north of Atlanta that closed after the housing crisis of 7 and 8. And I basically went from 2009 to 2020 without a permanent call. Now that doesn't mean I wasn't working. I had a lot of short-term positions. I actually worked at Georgia Tech for 5 years. I served congregations as interim pastors, kind of in between pastors, or I served without a full call. So I worked most of that time, but I wasn't a fully called pastor for almost 11 years. And I think that was significantly because of my disability. Doesn't mean that I was the perfect pastor for every church that I came across. Certainly, churches wouldn't have called me for other reasons. But I have to believe, in the more than 50 congregations I interviewed, I probably didn't get 40 of those calls, significantly because I happen to do life from a wheelchair. So how do you deal with that? Well, sometimes you get pretty damn depressed, as we all know. But I kept at it. I kept building relationships. I kept connecting with people. I kept doing the work that was put in front of me. And mostly I built relationships until more and more people knew me and trusted me. And eventually we got a new bishop who happens to be gay. And I think because he is also a part of not the mainstream, I think he was more open to what I might be going through. After he was elected bishop, I got a permanent full-time call down where I am now after about 4 months. So again, it's about finding allies, and showing people you can do things even when they don't think you can.
So forgive me because I'm a little unfamiliar with the terminology. Is a call determined by the bishop or is a call determined by the congregation?
It's determined by the congregation. In other words, I'm a pastor of the ELCA, but in order to be called, and that's official term we use,
Yeah.
you have to be hired, if you will, by the congregation.
It,
Now, I had jobs, where I wasn't officially called. I sort of worked for them for a period of time, but I didn't have that piece of paper that, between 2009 and 2020 that said I was their pastor. If that makes sense. So, like I
So-
said, I basically worked most of those 11 years, but it wasn't until 2020 that I had the official letter of call, we call it, the piece of paper that says I'm the pastor of this church.
it's almost like being a professor and getting tenure, kind of.
Yes, that'd be a good analogy, right?
Okay.
I was an adjunct pastor for a lot of years instead of a tenured pastor. Good
Fair.
analogy.
For us, um, what is an important verse for all of the members of the nonprofit is I am fearfully and wonderfully made. It's it's on all of our jerseys, it's on all of our shirts, it's on everything.
Nice.
We put it on everything. And a lot of us wrestle with faith in being disabled. Is that something that you can speak to?
Sure. And it's something I had to wrestle with for a long time in my early life. I mean, how can people like us exist if there's a gracious God, right? How can God allow the pain that we deal with, the broken bodies that we deal with, the discrimination, the unfairness, the injustice that we deal with? And a lot of, and quite frankly, sometimes the church doesn't help with that. Like I said, I've worked with and met, hundreds, maybe thousands of wonderful Christians, but I've come up against my share of really challenging Christians. So sometimes, as a person with a disability, you come across a church person and it can really sour you on God. For me, the way I deal with that is, you know, my theology says, look, this is a broken world. It's been broken ever since Adam and Eve. The world is broken in all kinds of ways, not just our disability, but, there's brokenness everywhere. You look at the environment, you look at crime, you look at hatred, racism, etc. The world is a broken place. But what I see and what I have experienced in my life is that God is constantly working to bring good news out of bad. Where I see God in my disability is, I think God is putting people in my life that I can touch, specifically because I have a handicap. Um, I wrote an article just recently for the local newspaper. One of the things about being a person in a wheelchair is everybody remembers the preacher in a wheelchair. I mean, like I said, I've served a lot of churches. I spent 15 years in the Atlanta area. A lot of people know me, recognize me, far more people than I recognize. And so I have been in bars, I have been in parking lots, I've been in restaurants, and people randomly just come up to me and say, hey, Pastor Devin, you preached at my church. And then I have to go through my mental Rolodex and say, yeah, but I preached in a lot of churches. You have to narrow that down. But one of the blessings of my disability is that maybe I get to have a little bit more impact on other people, because people remember, the gimp who preaches the gospel. So for me, I see God at work in all those blessings and all the ways that God uses my disability for good. I do not believe and I could not worship a God that I think caused my disability. I don't believe God causes my disability, your disability. I don't think God causes racism or violence. I think those things happen because you and I are messed up. We live in a broken world, but God is always working through that to try to bring grace in the midst of a bad situation. So that's how I work it out for myself. I'm not saying that you all have to be in the same place, but that's my take on it. I'm always looking for the grace even in the midst of the pain.
Okay, jumping back into one of the questions I gave you. What strategies do you use to maintain your positive outlook on life during challenging times?
Sure. One thing, and and some of this sounds really cheesy, um, yeah, and we all have to do what works for us. But one time, when I was really down, probably after I got turned down by one of those many jobs in churches, my mother, this strong woman I told you about, who had me when she was 25 years old, she said, you know, have you made a gratitude list lately? What do you mean a gratitude list? This list sucks. I haven't gotten a job. I'm running out of money. I can't get out of my wheelchair. What is there to be grateful for? And she really pushed me to say, what is there to be grateful for? And honestly, the first time she mentioned that, I couldn't think of hardly anything good that had happened, in the last few days. I said, well, we got to have pancakes for breakfast. I don't usually get pancakes. Well, that was a little bit good. It was the dumbest thing. But once you start looking for, okay, what is the blessing today? Um, uh, uh, as you when you start looking for blessings, it gets a whole lot easier to start to see more blessings. Uh, and I'm not a my handwriting like some of yours is advanced chicken scratch, so I'm not real good at making physical lists, but I will make mental lists on a regular basis. And so you know to this day, that was probably 10 or 15 years ago, my mom first challenged me with a gratitude list. I still will make a gratitude list several times a week, at least a mental one. Okay, what happened that was good today? What did I enjoy? Even in our 95-degree heat in Georgia, I got to sit in the sun today. I was saying to James, we have our pool. Our neighborhood pool is right across the street from my house, so I go swimming 2 to 3 days a week. So sometimes on my gratitude list is I got to get in the pool. I had a good meal. I had a good conversation with a friend, and so just and again, I don't mean to belittle it because some of the stuff that we experience is awful and hardly seems to be made up for by with a plate of pancakes or a happy conversation. But I just feel like um, I have to work to remind myself always of the positive things because it's the self-talk, right? I mean, I can be one of my own worst enemies if I start talking myself down or uh, or dwelling on the negative. Things only get worse, and so focusing on the positive. And this isn't unique to me, but one of my favorite words is yet, Y-E-T. When I struggle with something, either physical or otherwise, and I can't do it. I mean, you all know what it's like to not be able to do things physically. I try to end that sentence with yet. I can't do it yet. But tomorrow I'm going to try it again and I'm going to come at it at a different strategy. And just that little word reminds me, I'm not going to let this challenge, whatever it is, defeat me. So those are a couple little things. They might work for you. You might have others. Uh, but but I have found, that most of my challenges come from myself rather than other people. Yes, I've had people who've talked me down, discriminated against me, whatever, but the battle I really have to face is inside myself, and not letting that stuff get to me, not letting it define me. Mostly my battle is with myself, and if I can keep my own attitude positive, then I can deal a lot better with other people's garbage.
My my folks like to say, control the things you can control.
That's right.
Does anyone else have a question for Pastor Strong before I just go down my list? I can see Mr. Josh and Mr. Adam thinking about it.
Yeah, the mice, they are a turning.
Oh, hang on. Think they're gonna ask. Hold on.
So I want to hear about your struggles. This isn't only about me. We're all part of the same community. Anybody else want to share? What is it that you struggle with? We all have different levels of disability.
What did
different-
you say, Mr. Josh?
Well, something that Pastor Strong has said just resonated with me, and that's why I was like, and I think I know where this, I think I know where this discussion's headed.
Yeah.
Because you're right, we can often be our own worst critics.
Yeah.
And if we don't get a hold on it, devil can easily sneak up on us and make us think we're not good enough.
Yep.
Yeah. That negativity can come for you. So.
Absolutely. My point exactly.
Exactly, John.
All right. Well, here. Let me see. Let me. What else?
If I have a choice, James, I like question 4. Or where was it?
That's fine.
What was the one? Yeah.
Pastoral counseling.
Yeah, and I guess this was pastoral counseling more broadly speaking. And that's just in the world that I live in the church. There are certainly some things that because of my disability I struggle with. I can't always get into people's homes to visit them. That was even more true in Atlanta. I used to say, because of all the hills, there are some houses that I could get into by myself. Sometimes I could get into a house with a little bit of help, and other houses I was only going to get into with a winch. We all know at Atlanta, half the streets go straight up and the other half go straight down. So that's been part of the challenge of a disability. But overall, I have found that my wheelchair has been a huge asset to ministry, because most of ministry is trying to connect with people. And because some of my brokenness, it is literally so visible because I'm on 4 wheels. I've had a really good experience over the years, being able to connect with, listen to, and help people. Some of what I do is going to visit people in the hospital, and think about being in the hospital. 90% of the time, the patient you visit is laying in a bed, right? And the people who come into the room are literally standing over them, looking down at them. And it's something that you and I can experience as people who are in wheelchairs. Well, I come into the room in a wheelchair, and I'm right on the same level as the person in the bed. I can look them in the eye. I can take a hold of their hand. And so my handicap it opens up doors. People see my disability and they think, well, maybe this guy knows something about pain and struggle. So maybe I'll risk, sharing a little bit of my pain and struggle. There's a lady in my congregation. who has a condition called sinusitis. It is literally described as a rare disease, and I don't know what number of people in the United States get it every year, but it's very small. But it's a deterioration of the muscles, like muscular dystrophy or others. And she and I have made this incredible connection because she knows that I get it. I don't have her disease and she doesn't have mine, but we struggle with some of the same things. And that I'm able to be a pastor to her in a way that maybe some 6-foot athletic pastor couldn't be. And I have found that most people, even if they live in, so-called able bodies, most people are not particularly happy with their bodies, right? They're too tall or too short or too thin or too fat or something, right? And so I have found that people are more willing to talk to me about the things that they're unhappy with because they, I wear my disability so out front. Even teenagers. I don't know if I've ever met a teenager who's ever been, completely happy with their bodies, right? They're growing into it. And even the young kids are more willing to talk to me because of my disability. I think it opens doors. It also gives me a chance to let others help me, right? A lot of people in the world, the hardest thing is to let someone else help you. Well, as a pastor, I try to model, an attitude of servanthood. I help other people. But as a person with a disability, I need help, right? Somebody to open a door for me or do this or give me a push up a steep ramp or whatever, and so I try to be a healthy model for both, that we all need help and that we all can give help. We all have something to share. And so in that sense, my disability has been a huge asset to being a pastor. It's an interesting phenomenon because, as I said, I have had at times a tremendously hard time getting a job at a church. But once I get that job, my ministries have all gone very well, and I'm able to connect deeply with people. So that's just an interesting reality of who we live with. Our disabilities may make it hard to get in the door, but once we get in that door, we have something significant to give.
Awesome. Let's see, what else do we have here? We have.
I can't believe nobody has a question. Come on, guys. Or tell me your stories. What's it like for you? What challenges have you faced?
I have personal questions. Sorry. I don't know who going to go first. Should I go first?
You go first.
Do you have a website where I can listen to your preach? Because honestly, I go to church recently, but soon, next week, I'm going to have major eye surgery. I wouldn't be able to go to church, and Zoom, it's not the best. Sometimes I would like to listen, and especially after today, I'm more and more encouraged to go to
good.
church.
Good. Yeah.
Mr.
You
Tim.
do Zoom.
Sorry, I missed that. Is that you, James?
service?
Hi Devin, I got on a few minutes
Yes.
late.
No problem.
Have you thought about writing a book?
Yeah, I have. Maybe in my retirement, I'll get around to that. As you know, there's lots of books on disability, and I've read more than my share of them. Maybe someday, maybe someday.
Mr. Drew just joined us, and he's a little bit of a late comer, and I'm gonna pick on him. But
Absolutely.
he also is active within his church.
Oh, nice.
And as is Mr. Tim, who is being modest, and I'm sure he can think of a better question than just that. But do you have any questions for Pastor Strong, Mr. Drew, latecomer?
No, except I apologize for falling asleep.
I thought you would have a question ready. Mr. Tim, do you have another question for the past?
Is there of course I don't have a problem asking questions and talking in this talking to you in this format, but is there a way that I could chat with you after today?
Of course, yeah. James, I think has my contact info. Yeah, any of you are welcome. We can do a private Zoom. We could do email chat. I'm open. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Pastor, because I would like to pick your brain about becoming a pastor because um I know James introduced me, but and I'm sure he's being modest, but I'm sure he also told you that I'm interested in becoming a pastor myself.
Very good. What church do you attend? What's your denominational background?
It's right now it's United Methodist, but
Okay.
I want to create a non-denominational church
Very
and
good.
run it.
Well, everybody on this call who's probably ever attended a church knows that folks with disabilities are very underrepresented in churches for lots of reasons. And in many cases, we literally cannot get in the church. Lutheran churches are historically old buildings. And so tons of steps up to them. Sort of the traditional Protestant church or even Catholic church, is a long, narrow center aisle. Well, if you're in a wheelchair, where do you sit, right? Unless they have a cutout in the pew, you sit in the center aisle. But if you do that, you're blocking people and you're so obvious. I don't know if you all have
Yes.
experienced this, but when I am not the leader, when I am going to a group, whether it's church or anything for the first time, I want to blend in, right, as much as possible. I don't literally want to stick out like a sore thumb. Well, blending in is pretty damn hard for a lot of us. We're pretty noticeable when we enter most rooms, but in the churches, it can be even more difficult. Sometimes there's a cutout for a wheelchair. In the more modern churches, the church I serve doesn't have pews, it has chairs, and so we can just pull out a chair for somebody and make a space for a wheelchair. But it is difficult. I have been to churches just on my time off, and it's like, okay, there's a cutout for the wheelchair in the very back, or I can sit right up front, basically underneath the pastor's nose. Well, I don't want to do either of those things, I don't want to be in the back where I can't see anything.
Right.
Everybody stands up, and I don't want to be so noticeable as to be, literally, up under the pastor's nose. And so,
Right.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because we kind of do stick out like a sore thumb.
Yep. So my point being, that there is definitely a need for churches that are disabled friendly, and I've had people, I have consulted with churches in the past about how to make them wheelchair accessible or how to make them disabled friendly. And I've literally had people say, well, we don't need to do that. We don't need that ramp. We don't need that wide bathroom because we don't have any disabled members here. And I want to say, you don't have any disabled members because they can't get in your freaking building. You know, if you made your building a little more accessible, you might find a few, and of
But
course,
before
you know,
churches, city and country need to be accessible. This
that's
is
right.
why one of the reason I live in Canada. In Canada, it's the best example. We
Yep.
have SkyTrain, all cities, all streets has got ramp,
Yep.
even
Yeah.
to, except the old building. Even in old building, they put electric elevator
Well,
now.
that's good. And we're in a lot of places that's where we are in the States too. But there's sort of levels of accessibility, right? Sometimes you can get into a building, but not the most conveniently. I went to college in the 80s, and a great example of this. The dining hall was on the second floor of the student union. So for 4 years, I literally rode the garbage elevator up to the kitchen. I talk about unappetizing to have your college meal after you've seen how it's made, coming through the garbage elevator, the freight elevator, and going through the kitchen. I could get out there, and I could eat, right? So what am I complaining about? But it wasn't the best way in the world, to have to take the freight elevator,
Right.
and go through the kitchen to get to the dining hall. So sometimes things are, sort of basically accessible, but they're not necessarily. There's a difference between being minimally accessible and friendly.
Right.
James knows
What?
this. At Oglethorpe, I'm trying to think. This was a few years back when Oliver was in school. I went to see him in a play, James, and they got me in there, but I can't remember. It must have been like in the studio theater or something. I had to go through some back way and actually come in through the stage and then take the ramp from the stage back down to where the audience sits. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It was the most back asswards way to attend a theater performance I'd ever seen.
Yes. So for those of you who don't know, I went to Oglethorpe University, and it's one of the oldest universities in Georgia. It was built in 1915, and some of the buildings are historical, and we love historic buildings. Really, I do. I love historic buildings, but they can be a bit of a challenge to navigate.
True.
I believe my favorite one was in one of the buildings where I had my classes. There was a elevator original to the building. Like it was built in 1915, and they had an elevator that was original to the building that I had to use to get to class every day, and that was just a little frightening.
1915 elevator,
Yeah,
complete with the original mice, right?
It was one of those old, have you ever seen the original Great Gatsby? It was like the middle.
Yeah.
It was like that, where you take the thing and you pull the metal across, and then
Yep.
yep, old school 1915 elevator. It
Yeah.
apparently broke 2 or 3 years ago, and they still haven't fixed it.
So, Devin, can you walk us through what the conversation with your current church when you found a permanent place to pastor, what that conversation was like? Did they make physical accommodations to the building? Did they how long did it take for them to warm up to the idea of having a disabled pastor and willing to work with you?
Yeah, good questions. Actually, they believe it or not, they had to make, well, very few physical accommodations. My current church is in the Savannah area, and I don't know if you know the Georgia coast, but unlike Atlanta, the Georgia coast is very flat. So it's much more accessible to start with. And the church that I serve just so happens to literally not have a step anywhere in the building, including where the altar, where the communion table sits. I would say 95% of all Lutheran churches, they have the altar table up a few steps, so the pastor is up higher, than partly just to be seen, right? And so that's the way most Lutheran churches are built. This church, for whatever reason, the altar is literally on the same level as everybody else. There's almost even no carpet in the building. It's sort of a coastal style, so the floors in most of the building are just polished concrete, which of course is great for those of us in wheelchairs, because carpet is horrible on wheelchairs, as we all know. So from that point of view, there wasn't a lot that needed to be done. I had to rearrange my office a little bit. I didn't need an office chair because I bring my own, and we had to take some of the furniture out, and we had to reconfigure a few things, just minor things, so that I could get in the church office where the secretary works. And they have an attic where they store a lot of stuff. I couldn't get into the attic if my life depended on it, so other people have to do that. But there really wasn't a lot by the way of physical accommodation. They talked about at one point cutting down the altar. The altar, you know what I mean when I talk about an altar. Basically, it's just a long table, maybe 6 feet long, and Lutheran pastors typically stand behind the altar to read the gospel lessons, and they'll start the process of doing communion from behind the altar. And they actually talked about chopping the altar down to seating level, but we ended up not doing that. I don't preach using a pulpit. I prefer to be sort of out and exposed, so I don't need a pulpit. And when I distribute communion, I come out from behind the altar. I like being closer to the people anyway, so we didn't have to do anything there. I think what really helped though is that we're able to laugh. As simple as that sounds, right? Particularly in a religious context. But I think, and you'd have to ask them, but I think what won them over was a sense of humor, and they could see that I was a real person, and they were open to it. And apparently and I was helped because the guy who before me who interviewed, they told me later, acted like he was God's gift to them, and I didn't come across that way. But honestly, I make my best connections with people, when I can get them laughing, and it's okay to laugh at our disabilities, even though they can be so difficult and so painful. I like to say, I take my job very seriously, but I don't take myself all that seriously. And I don't mean that I'm running myself down, but I'm broken, I'm screwed up, I have good days and bad days. And I think if we can just be human with people, and if they're open to listening to that, it goes a long way to making a connection. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yes.
it does.
We have a lot
A
of
lot of sense.
we have a lot of comedians on this call, not many stand-up comedians.
Yeah, no stand-up comedians.
Um,
So if any of you ever, I like the disability t-shirts. I've got one. I'm not wearing it today. If I'd have been smart, I'd have put it on before this call. But my favorite t-shirt is, you know what I can't stand? No, seriously, I can't stand.
So Devin, do you live by yourself or do you have a family?
I have a family. I have a wife of almost 37 years. We'll be married 37 years on New Year's Eve. Um, and I have two grown children. Those of you who came in late didn't hear this, but how I got to know James because my son was a classmate of James at Oglethorpe. So my son and daughter are twins. They're 28, so they haven't been in the house for about 10 years, but I am married. Yeah. And quite honestly, I can do a lot of things for myself, but I couldn't do everything. I can get in and out of bed, I can get in and out of my wheelchair, bathroom, showering. But I do depend on my wife, for a lot of the physical stuff around the house. Um, as I've gotten older, I literally can't bend over and easily put on socks and shoes. I used to be able to do that when I was in my 20s and 30s, even 40s, but I'll be 60 at my next birthday. I don't bend as well as I used to. So I definitely depend on my wife. Um, um, but no, so just my wife and me and the two kids that we see several times a year.
Well, I asked that because, and I don't mean to get off topic here, but I asked that because I feel like sometimes a lot of people don't like to talk about disabled people in dating when it comes to dating in relationships.
Absolutely. I've had so many people, when we're out at a restaurant or anywhere in public, people outside my congregation, just out wherever, people who will assume that my wife is my sister or my nurse, right? Because disabled people obviously don't have spouses, and we definitely don't have sex. That's a terrible, right? So it is definitely, a perception.
Forget the fact that we want to be as normal as possible, because we can never do that. So they would automatically assume that we don't have relationships, and it's terrible.
Well, Pastor Strong, if I remember correctly, you met your wife at church, right?
Actually in college.
In college.
Yeah, she was a year older than me, and I went to a small Lutheran college similar to Oglethorpe. Oglethorpe has a Presbyterian background. My college had a Lutheran background. And first day of college, I went to the student activities fair, and my wife was running the student newspaper, and I signed up to be a reporter. So I started working for my wife, and as I say, I've been working for her for 37 years.
Well,
But I've had this experience. I wonder how many of you have. We have been out to a restaurant many times, just the two of us, and a waitress will look at my wife. Her name is Chris, and the waitress will ask Chris, ask her, what does he want to eat? Just assuming because I'm in a wheelchair, I can't speak. And she will say, well, he has a doctorate. Go ahead and ask him. I think he's capable of ordering. So all kinds of perceptions out there of us.
yeah, I mean, yeah.
It's really sad how people want to generalize people with disabilities and think we can't talk and fend for ourselves.
Well, and some of us can't, right? I mean, there are all levels of disability, but you have to meet the person as they are. I mean, how do you treat a person with a disability like a person? I mean,
Right.
We all have abilities and disabilities, but there is no one handicap.
Right.
And the assumption is that we all
And-
know each other. I went to seminary with a guy who also happened to be wheelchair bound. He had cancer, and so he had his legs amputated. I think as a teenager, and so when we went to seminary in our 20s, you know, he was the only other person on campus of maybe 500 people in a wheelchair, and I'm registering for classes on one of the first days, and the registrar asked me, "Do you know the other?" You know, and I could tell darn well she was going to say the other disabled person, the other guy in a wheelchair, because we all have a club, right? You know, we all know each other from everywhere, you know, and finally I interrupted her. I happened to know his first name was Rolf, and I said, "You mean Rolf?" "No, we haven't met yet," you know, but I'd heard about him. So just the perception that every disabled person knows every other disabled person in the whole world, the assumptions are ridiculous.
Yes, and the one thing that I absolutely hate is when I'm walking in the hallway or I try to say hi to people instead of saying hi, they snicker and talk at me behind my back.
Ouch. Yep. That hurts.
It did hurt, yeah.
It just irritates me, and I'm like, instead of making fun of me, why don't you just sit down and have a conversation with me when you know I can speak?
Yep.
Sometimes I want to turn around and say, "What did you say?"
Yeah. You know I can hear you, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
The brain bone is connected to the ear bone.
You know, what's really funny, I'm bilingual. I speak English and Spanish and conversational in a few other languages, enough to get myself into trouble. But my favorite thing in the universe is that I speak Spanish fluently. And every now and then I'll interact. I don't know if it's I go to a restaurant or I'm out in public and I catch someone saying in another language, "Oh," and more often than not, it's like a kid. It's a kid asking their parents, "Oh, why is he in a wheelchair? Why is he like that?" And the parent, assuming that I can't understand what they're saying, will say, "Oh, you know, I've gotten everything from, oh, he's just like that. You know, his legs don't work properly," which I think is a fine and good answer. I think that's a halfway decent answer to give a child. And I've also had the other end of that where the answer isn't as kind, and I get to, I'll say very politely, you know, "Excuse me, ma'am," or "Excuse me, sir, your child is beautiful," in their language. And then all of a sudden, as a white kid in a wheelchair, they'll go, "Oh, hi," you know, and I turn pale, but it's great.
But it just hurts all of us when they want to generalize our condition and we want to say, "You know, we can hear you," and that hurts us when you just generalize something and don't even speak to us about it. You want to make assumptions.
Right. What I try to remember is that most people, not everybody, but most people are not trying to be mean. They're just afraid. They're just nervous. And so on my better days, and not all my days are better days, but on my better days, I try to help people over that fear. You know,
Yeah, well,
we-
I'm just glad you understand how we feel and what we mean when we say that, because it really does hurt when they don't even speak to us. They just want to make assumptions.
And then I hit
Absolutely, no, there's no doubt. I mean, like I said, you know, when I had trouble getting jobs for so many years, you know, and I'm talking to Christians, people of faith who claim Jesus, you know, Jesus has love, and they're even afraid to have the conversation about a disability. Because if you're willing to talk to me, about, yeah, how do you do this or how do you manage that? I'll answer you. I'll tell you anything you want to know. But when people are so nervous or so uncomfortable that they won't even broach the subject directly, I can't do anything to help you with your attitude if you won't talk.
That's true.
And
Exactly.
Mr. Tim, I thought I heard you.
Yes. So how when did you at what point in your ministry and really in life did you feel like you had a good handle on where it was easy for you to put somebody at ease with humor, trying to get them to loosen up and talk to you?
That's a good question. I think I've been a smart ass my whole life. You know, I mean, I see a lot of you smiling. Part of the way that we deal with the pain of our lives, a lot of us is through humor, right?
Yeah.
And we laugh because laughing is better than crying. Um, um, I don't know. I just found, and I can't put a.
I love the way you said that. I resonate with that a lot.
I'm sorry. Say it again.
I love the way you said that. Laughing is better than crying. I say that phrase all the time.
Yep. So I don't know when I got more comfortable, but I just realized, look, I know it's a little weird to be in a wheelchair. Most people don't know somebody our age in a wheelchair, but if we're going to be friends, I got to get you over your fear of this, right? And it's okay to laugh, I don't know, you just break the ice and try to help people, help people be more
And I don't
comfortable.
mean, and I don't mean to repeat myself at
Oh.
all, but that's exactly what I'm saying. If people don't talk to me, how am I supposed to tell them or let them know that it's okay to talk to me if they just want to be ignorant and not talking to me to begin with?
Right. It is definitely their problem, right? But if I want to be in relationship with that person, then I have to deal with their problem, right? Or at least that's one of the options. The other option is just to blow them off and cut myself off from that person. But even though I recognize that it's the problem of some able-bodied person that doesn't want to, isn't comfortable with me, if I want to connect with that person, to get a job or even as a friend, I have to work extra hard, to help that person realize that I'm a regular person, and that's
Right.
a balance, right? I don't want to take responsibility for someone else's problem. Their problem is their problem, but I also know that if I want a relationship with that person, it's not going to happen unless I can break the ice somehow. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
For a lot
Exactly.
of, for a
Well,
lot of
I
us,
would approach this person and I would say, disability is not contagious, but your attitude is contagious.
Yep.
That's true.
for a lot of
You
us,
cannot touch my disability.
Yep.
And one day, they young, they think that, but when they reach a certain age, they use walker or wheelchair or cane, and they might understand us.
Yeah, exactly. Now I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember this, but I would say in the 70s, maybe even in the early 80s, there were some disability groups out there that were fairly militant, and they would call quote unquote normal people tabs, temporarily able-bodied people. And that's going to your point. That
Right.
If people get old enough, right, they might wind up in a wheelchair or a walker or a cane, right?
Yes.
And so there were certain disability groups out there that would refer to others as tabs. You know, we were disabled, but they were only temporarily able-bodied. That's I don't want to be that militant, but I understand the point of view, right? Sooner or
Right.
later, everybody's going to have a disability. And I try to remember that everybody does have a disability, probably more than one, right? It's what's different about our disability is it's visible, right? Most people can hide their disabilities, at least to the casual observer, right? They're on the inside. Their disabilities are self-doubt or ignorance or some other kind of trauma. You know, we don't have that luxury of hiding our disabilities because they're out there for everyone to see.
Yeah.
And that's both
Devin,
good and bad.
the only thing we want is to be as normal as possible.
Yep.
And when
Exactly.
people make fun of us, it doesn't make us feel good. It just makes us stand out more.
Exactly. Nope, I agree.
But and I'll lean back on what Pastor Strong said earlier. That can also serve us really well. People will always remember the pastor in the wheelchair, as he said earlier. If people are always going to recognize you, you might as well make it part of your personal branding.
That's right.
I'm surprised that I haven't heard a question from Ali Winslow or Mr. Adam. Do either of you have and I see Miss Paul raising her hand now. She uses a speech board, so give her a second.
Sure.
Yep, I know. We'll wait a second.
Take your time. No, gosh, if anything, we can be patient around here.
I want to say something too. I want to say something too.
What do you want to say, Paul?
Mm.
You got it, Pup?
When people see you and be like, oh, they can't walk, be like, shut up, I can walk and talk, so shut up.
Yep.
I I'm surprised we haven't gotten more comments from Mr. Adam or Miss Ari Winslow, but I think we can all echo with that sentiment. I mean, I can only imagine how many people you must have to deal with, because people don't even understand sometimes that know what they're saying,
Yeah,
let alone can articulate back to them.
yeah,
So
Exactly.
that must be very frustrating for you.
yeah.
Ali, did you not have anything you wanted to ask, Mr. Schwab?
Yeah.
No calling you out. Okay. What about What about you, Mr. Adam?
Yeah, well, going back to about, disabilities, in churches, I'm a Catholic and the Archdiocese of Archdiocese of Atlanta have a disabilities ministry. And, I have participated, well, they have the, faith and sharing mass, which is mass where they have for people with disabilities, and also I've been to a camp at Camp Phillips called Tony's Camp. And that's for people with disabilities, and at my home church, they had a faith and sharing mass that I actually was able to participate. Before the sanctuary got renovated, there was no ramp to get up, so they had the portable ramps. The portable ramps go up to the altar. So I was able to read one of the readings.
Were you
James?
at?
Go ahead, James.
No, I just want to make sure. Were you asking Pastor Strong how he navigates the churches?
No, I was telling them what I was involved in.
Oh, okay.
I heard the, camp with folks
I
with
was,
disabilities. It certainly helps, to be with folks with, similar disabilities, people who understand. But that brings up an interesting question. I spend most of my life and most of my time in any given day, week, or month with able-bodied people. And I have made a conscious decision that I want people to see me as the pastor who happens to have a disability rather than the disabled person who happens to be a pastor. That makes sense?
Yes, it does.
I mean, I am more than my disability. You are more than your disability. I want people to see me for my interests, my talents, my hobbies. I know that my disability is out there, and we're going to have to talk about it. We're going to have to deal with it at some point. And I'm more than willing to do that, obviously. But I just, I want to, I made a decision a long time ago in my life, probably not even consciously, but that I want to be a person first and a disability second. There's so much more to me than this wheelchair. The wheelchair is just how I navigate, right?
Right.
So I have tended not to be with a lot of other disabled people. Not that I avoid us, but I spend most, 95% of my time in the able-bodied world, because that's where I'm comfortable. But it does have its challenges.
Yeah.
How do you go ahead, Adam?
I was gonna say to the disabilities ministry of Diocese of Atlanta, I knew two deacons who was also in that in wheelchairs. So
I didn't quite get all that. You're a ways from the microphone. Did you hear more, James?
No, can you say that again, Mr. Adam, please?
it said that to the Archdiocese of Atlanta, disabilities ministry, I knew two deacons who were in a wheelchair.
Gotcha.
The Archdiocese of Atlanta, he knew two deacons that were in a wheelchair.
Yep.
Do you run across many disabled pastors in the Lutheran Church, or pastors with disabilities, rather?
Nope. Years ago, I was on a panel of pastors and seminarians with disabilities. And the ELCA is relatively large. There's just under 10,000 Lutheran churches in across the country. So we're not a small denomination, but there are so few pastors with disabilities that there is no group of disabled pastors across the Lutheran Church. We call them synods. The regional breakdown of our denominations, it would be the equivalent of a Catholic diocese. Well, our synod, our diocese, if you will, down here in the South is 4 states. It's Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. And I am the only pastor with a significant disability in those entire 4 states. In all of my 33 years in ministry, I have probably met less than a dozen pastors with disabilities, some with physical disabilities. I've met a blind pastor or 2, but there are so few of us that there's no group, and sometimes I really resent that, because there are groups of women pastors, there are groups of young pastors, there are groups of minority pastors, and I will sometimes say to our bishop, look, there is no disabled pastor group in the whole ELCA. So, there are times when I feel lonely, and I wish I had the support of peers, but, the reality is, that there just aren't many of us. And we have some things in common, but there's a lot of things different about me than a blind pastor. I know a deaf pastor, but again, very different kinds of disabilities. So there just aren't a lot of us.
Exactly. And what I was gonna say earlier was I wish people would understand that we don't choose to use the wheelchair, but we have to use the wheelchair to get around, just like able-bodied people use their legs.
Exactly.
And I wish that's what able-bodied people would understand. Also, I wanted to ask you, because I know you run into this, you and your wife run into this using a wheelchair. One of my biggest pet peeves is when able-bodied people who do not have a handicap tag or some form of a disability have 2 things. They either take up a handicap space so I can't park, or they get out of the car, and I say to myself, well, they're not disabled. They can walk just fine.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It is definitely a pet peeve, and my
I've
wife will
that
get
same-
more frosted about it than I will. But I tell you, the one thing worse than parking in a handicap spot is more than every once in a while, from time to time, I'll see somebody park in the no man's land between handicap spaces, the stripe zone. And that's the part I need, right? I'm fairly mobile, I can go far distances in my wheelchair, but I need that no man's land because I store my wheelchair on the top of my car, so I need to be able to open the door to have it fully extended to get my wheelchair out. If you park in the no man's land, you've essentially taken up 2 handicap spaces that I can't use because your car is in the way. I can't open the door. I mean, it absolutely drives me nuts.
Exactly.
And I'll call out Miss Sophia because I heard Sophia start to say something. Miss Sophia, you're muted. But I heard you start.
I was just relating to Drew about how he said like people take handicap spaces all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or you have to explain yourself away. When you forget your handicap tag from, time to time, or you're at a big event and they don't have handicap spaces, And
Yep.
you have to basically say, I have this, I am blank disabled.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just
Exactly.
frustrating. It's exhausting to constantly have to remind people of it and not just like live like
Yeah.
everyone else does.
And go ahead, James. I'm sorry.
okay. And going back to what you said earlier, Pastor Strong, we often have to break the ice in order to maintain the relationships, the friendships, and what have you.
Yeah.
But it can be a little taxing to do that over and over and over again for years and years and years and years
Absolutely.
with every single person that you meet. How do you stay patient? Because that there are a lot of people out there who lose their patience. They get bitter, and all of a sudden, when they do have someone who is trying to make a halfway effort, they just end up getting told off because you've been, years and years, you've been hardened by life and people's ignorance. How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I wish I drank heavily. I mean, I don't know. What choice do you have, right? I mean, sometimes I get angry. I really haven't told many people off. Not because I don't feel it, but it just doesn't accomplish anything, right?
Right.
Um, you know, but you talk about being exhausting. The one thing I was thinking about before we wrap this up, I'll be 60 on my next birthday, and I definitely feel like I had less energy than I used to. I mean, and that's normal, right? It's part of the aging process, but I think it's accelerated when you have a disability. I've always thought of myself as having pretty boundless energy, but there are definitely bounds to my energy these days. It takes so much work to get in and out of the car, to go to the hospital, to do the things that all of us have to do. And sometimes I just have to give myself permission to disengage, and to rest and to tackle the fight tomorrow. To just to name the exhaustion, because it does. People think that this is the first time you've heard this stupid question, when it's probably the 1,000th time. Or it's the first time you've dealt with somebody parking in a handicap spot, or asking your partner what you want for dinner. We've heard all this stuff a million times before, and their stupid jokes and all the rest of it, and sometimes I just have to say, I've had enough of this for today, but tomorrow is another day, and I'll be in a better mood tomorrow, and you go after it again. But I don't think you can. I mean, there's a balance, right? I don't want to live in that anger. I don't want to be, the angry gimp, because that's not good for me. It's not good for anybody. But at the same time, I don't want to let people get away with their stupidity or their meanness that you were talking about. I think for our sake and for their sake, we have to call people on it. We have to educate them, but we don't have to do it every minute of every day, and
Right.
so if you're frustrated, if you're tired of the umpteenth stupid question that day, let it go and come back to it the next day,
Right.
but try not to live in that anger, and at the same time try not to let people get away with their crap.
Right.
Yeah.
And Pastor Strong, might I add that me and James joke about this all the time, but
Yeah.
we joke, me and him are like close in age. I'm almost 31 and he's 28 or 29, but we joke all the time that we feel like 80-year-olds because some days we don't even feel like getting up out of bed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
Definitely.
Anyway, it's getting pretty late and I want to be conscious of Pastor Strong's time. There is one thing that I want to do before we call it for the evening. I wanted to do a group picture real fast.
Okay.
Sophia, are you in a good place to do a group picture real quick? All right, let's do this real quick. Everybody look like you're having fun. Big smile. Thank you. Hold on 2 seconds. 3, 2. All right, awesome. Let's do one more. Hold on 1 second. Gotta save the first one. All right, let me do one more. Hold on. Everybody look at me. Everybody look at the camera. Oh, hang on. Look at the camera. Mr. Drew, turn your head about 45 degrees the other way.
Oops,
Look into
sorry.
your phone, please.
You're not in the
Hold on.
frame.
Okay. Hang on a second.
You're getting there.
Paul, are you ready? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Mr. Drew, yeah, I'm kind of look. There we go.
There we go.
Much better. 3, 2, 1. Wait. 3, 2, 1. Yes. Awesome.
Somebody mentioned early on about wanting to be able to reach out to me one-on-one. I'm totally open to that. James has my email address and my cell phone. Feel free to reach out to me in whatever way that works for you. If I can be of any help, answer any questions, or just be there to vent, you know, if you want to vent, I'm here. So feel free. If I can you know, if I can be there for you, I'm all about that, so feel free.
Thank you, Pastor Strong, because I will definitely be calling you.
All right,
Pastor
sounds
Strong,
good.
thank you so much. I'm well aware it's like 8:38 and it's probably past all of our bedtimes. So
That's right.
I will thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. I will see you later.
Very
Okay.
good. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
James.
Thanks for having me. It was
Yes.
Thank
awesome.
you.
Thank you,
sir.
Pastor Strong.
You are welcome.
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.